So we left off here last class. Oh, and I want to do F and G. Okay, I forgot about this. Okay. I have a fair amount that I want to get through, but a lot of it's the same type of problem. What I was talking about with my kids last period, I gave them more than 10 minutes to work on homework, so hopefully I can give you guys similar today. We were like, the math isn't the hard part, but it's like all the steps are the hard part. So you'll find you're like, I'm not doing difficult math, but it's remembering how to do everything that we've done so far. Okay. I know I kind of rushed through a little bit at the end yesterday because we were on a short period, but remember when we do these problems, if I say solve, if I say find the zero, if I say anything like that, we're going to start by trying to factor or quadratic formula. And if I can do that, if I can factor, if I can do quadratic formula, I'm always going to try that first, okay? So like if you remember the first one we did yesterday, we were just able to factor and that was able to get us all the x's. We were able to solve, find everything that way. However, if you can't factor, so letter B, we started that yesterday, and I don't know if you remembered, but I tried to like, okay, let's try to group, and we couldn't do it. So if you can't factor, that's when I introduced PRRs yesterday. You guys remember talking about that yesterday? Mm-hmm. PRRs is basically a list of numbers, a list of rational numbers, so whole numbers, integers, numbers that can be written as fractions, that come from the factors of your constant, divided by factors of your leading coefficient. So in the problem that we didn't finish yesterday that we had started, my constant was that -6. So the numbers that multiply to be -6, 1, 2, 3, 6 go on the numerator of my PRRs. And then in the denominator of my PRRs is the factors of my leading coefficient, which was that 1 right there. Once we made a list of our possible rational roots, our PRRs, then we had to plug them in to figure out which ones actually work. So if you go back up to my list, I wrote PRRs and plug in. You could also do synthetic division. We haven't because that just takes a little bit more work, but you are welcome to do that. We plug in, those are the same colors because they're kind of the same step. Once you find the one that works, then we're going to use synthetic division to go. So I think it took us a little bit, but right at the end of class, we found out that -3 worked. And do you remember, what does it mean for it to work? It equals 0. So when you plug that number in, it equals 0. So I finally got -3 to work. So that means that one of my zeros is -3. Okay, so x is going to equal -3. I previewed this, but we didn't actually do it. The next step we want to do is synthetic division. Now we're going to take that -3 and we're going to do our synthetic division with it. So -3, and I'll take my coefficients. 1, 1, -8, -6. You should get out 0 at the end of that. Your remainder should be 0, but I will now get like a smaller polynomial that I can either factor, quadratic formula, or if necessary, I'll just PRR again. So we'll be able to simplify that down. So synthetic division, we should be pretty good at this. I shouldn't have to sit and walk us through it. And once I synthetically divide, I now get x squared minus 2x minus 2. I'm breaking it down bit by bit until I get down to numbers. My next question, I'm going to go back to my list. Since I did synthetic division, now I come back up to the top and I try to factor or quadratic formula again. Could I factor this x squared minus 2, x squared minus 2x minus 2? It's not going to factor, but will it quadratic formula? Yes, because it's an x squared. So I'm going to do quadratic formula for this. And we're going to plug it in probably over here somewhere. X equals +2 plus or minus square root -2 squared minus 4 times 1 times -2. 2 times 1. Just keep working through a little quieter. Right here. Yeah, perfect. So I hadn't done this one for like a week and I was like, I don't remember getting this answer, but now we do. In this case, I am gonna have to simplify this radical, so root 12 breaks down to 2 root 3. So I get 2 plus or minus 2 root 3 over 2. And then all those 2's cancel out. I don't just get left with plus or minus root 3. I get left with 1 plus or minus root 3. You have to remember that that number in front is being added or subtracted. We can't just get rid of it. And so as funny as that looks, that's a legit answer. So -3 we got from doing our PRRs, and then from doing our quadratic formula, I get 1 plus or minus root 3. And I'm going to list both of those zeros together somewhere. Because that is ultimately what they asked of me. This is what the question wanted to know. What are my zeros? Yeah, Maddie. And then I think those are my PRRs. So our PRRs came from the factors of your constant of that -6 that I have highlighted. So numbers that multiply by -6, 1, 2, 3, 6. And then the denominator, that 1, came from my leading coefficient, which is that blue highlight, which is just a 1. Now, the good thing, we're just going to keep doing this process like over and over and over today. You're like, Miss White, I don't know if that's a good thing. You're right, but at least we're getting the method down. We're getting the process down, okay? Do you think we can try the one underneath that? What do I try first? Anytime I look at one of these problems, what do I ask myself if I can do first? Factor or quad form? Can we do either factor or quad form to this number, this right here? No. Then what do I try? Good. We do our PRRs. Very good, Joey. What is my constant here? 8. Good. So factors of 8 are 1, 2, 4, and 8. What's my leading coefficient? 1. What are my factors of 1? 1. Now, last period, people were like, well, can I just erase that and just go straight to this? Sure. It's my job as your math teacher to show you the right way. And every so often, that won't just be a 1. It will be like a 2, and then we'll have to do both of them. If that were the case, that's why I practice dividing everything on top by 1, which gives us just all my whole numbers, 1, 2, 4, 8. If I also have to divide it by another number, and let's pretend in this case it's 2, then I would have to divide everything on top by 2, okay? The only number that would add to my list would be a fraction of 1/2, because 2 divided by 2 is 1, I already have that listed. 4 divided by 2 is 2, I already have that listed, and 8 divided by 2 is 4, I already have that listed. So I'm just showing you that if there was a fraction, then you would have to include it there. However, in our problem today, that is none of our worries. And so if you wanted to just start here, I'm okay with that. Yes, Avery.
How did you get 1 and 2 on the bottom?
I'm making it up.
Oh.
I gave an example because I think at least on homework or maybe another one we see today, there'll be another number out there. So I just was showing you what we would do if that was the case. Okay, but those are my only PRRs. Now what do I do now that I have a list of PRRs? Plug them in. Good. And this is where we can kind of use our brain a little bit. As I'm rewriting it, I might think, is there one number that might work better than other numbers? This is kind of long. I might just start with 1. Okay, let's start with 1. 1, 1, 1, 1. Ooh, okay. 1 to the 4th is 1. 1 to the 3rd is 1 times -3 is -3. Oh, that should be a squared. 1 squared is 1. 2 times -6 is -6. 6 times 1 is 6. Plus 8. Will that equal 0? No. I'm going to try -1 next. When in doubt, I'm going to go 1, -1, 2, -2 all the way down. Every so often I might find a pattern or I might think of something might work better than others. We're pretty close here, but let's see if by switching up some of my positive and negatives, it'll work better. -1 to the 4th, is that going to be positive or -1? +1. -1 to the 3rd is going to be -1. -1 times -3 is +3. -1 squared is +1 times -6 is -6. 6 times -6 is, or 6 times -1 is -6, and then +8. Four minus 6 is -2, -8. Oh, +8. That one works. That one works. I get 0 out. So that means one of my zeros is already -1. Now that I've done my plugging in and I've decided -1 is a factor, what do I do with this information next? What's in synthetic division? Good. So I'm going to go do synthetic division with -1 to get my next piece. I gave myself with 0 space, but that's okay. -1, -4, +4, -2, +2, 8, -8, 0. Perfect. Because I have no space, I'm gonna rewrite it up here. But I got x squared minus 4x. Oh no, x to the 3rd minus 4x squared. Minus 2x plus 8. Ooh. Okay. We've done it. We tried our factoring quadratic formula. We did our PRR. We plugged it in. We did synthetic division. Now what do I do now that I've kind of done all my steps and I've got a new problem? Repeat. Can I factor this?
You can group it.
Let's group it. Grouping is factoring. Grouping's a type of factoring. So Avery says we can group it. Let's group it. Take out my GCF from each one. Now that I've grouped, what do I do with this? Equal it to 0. Good. Set them equal to 0. So that means I've got 2 more, or I guess 3 more zeros. I have 4 and I have plus or minus √2. That 2 zoomed? Okay. So we did PRRs, we plugged in, we did synthetic division. From that synthetic division, we could then group, and then we just factored it out by grouping, and then we solved that, set it equal to 0. So notice that each of these steps individually isn't hard. It's not hard to look at factors and make a fraction. It's not hard to plug a number in. It's not hard to do synthetic division. It's not hard to group, but it's hard to do all of those steps at once, okay? Maddie. No, is there a possibility for more than one PRR? Yes. Are most of the ones I'm going to give you only one PRR? Yes. You should be able to factor, especially on a test or quiz, you should be able to factor this out or quadratic formula. We may do a couple in class, and I haven't done homework for 2-5 yet. There may be a couple that ask for 2 PRRs, but that should not be the case on a test or quiz, just how long it takes. Okay. All right, before we get into this boundedness, which we are going to cover in 1 second, I actually want to go back to 2.3. We left 2 problems blank. We left F and G blank on 2.3. So, and I did them within my last period, so I need to erase them, but you have them completely blank. So come and meet me there because it's this exact same type of problem. We're just going to end up graphing it when we're done. And we're going to solve these. All right, so you start on this next one. It looks like we cannot do any factoring, which is why we skipped it to begin with. Awesome. Good enough for me. All right, we'll walk through the first one together and then we'll do the second one more by yourself, okay? So first step, we always try to factor. We skipped this one because we couldn't factor it by grouping. The second thing that we try if we can't factor or quadratic formula is what? What's the second thing I do? PRRs, right? Let's do some PRRs. What's my constant this time? My constant on number F. 55. Okay, so let's think about numbers that multiply to be 55. I've got 1 and 55, and I think I've got 5 and 11. I think that's it. All right, that's my numerator. What's my leading coefficient factors? Just 1, right? So again, you can write it like that. If you want to just erase the fraction, oh, my erasing way too big. If you want to erase just the fraction bar and the 1, you're welcome to do that and just be here because it's 1. Those are all my PRRs. No fractions today. Okay. If you'd rather write it out, this is what it will look. Okay. So now we're going to make a guess. Now we're going to take our PRRs and decide which one's going to actually be a factor. And what do we do to figure those out again? What's the math I'm going to do next? Plug it in. Plug it in. Okay. As I write this equation out, I want you to think about maybe what's a good one to start with. 1. Let's start with 1. Sometimes it'll work out on the first one. 1 to the third is 1. 1 squared is 1 times negative 7 is negative 7. Negative 49 times 1 is negative 49 plus 55. That gives me negative 6. Negative 6 minus 49 is negative 55. Oh, plus 55 is 0. Good job, Abe. That one worked out. Now, once we found out a factor that works, I know one of my x's is going to be 1. What do I do to find my other x's? Synthetic division. 1, negative 7, negative 49, 55. Carrying on that 1. 1, negative 6, minus 6, negative 55. Oh, and 0. All right, now that I synthetically divided, what do I get to do?
Okay.
Say again?
Okay.
Quadratic. I actually think we can factor this one. What is? Yep. X minus 11 and x. Good, plus 5. Very good. And so x equals what numbers? Good. And I love that Avery didn't forget her 1. She remembered her 1 from the beginning, and then she also remembered her 11 and her negative 5 from what she just found. Since this is a graphing problem, once you have those zeros, can we graph it? Know your end behavior, positive, negative, even, odd. Any funny things going on? Any bounces, any snaking? Nope, everything just crosses through like normal. Say 11's right about there. This is a positive odd graph. So I start low and I end high. All right, I'm gonna be quiet for a minute. Do you think you can try G without me? Start G without me. A lot of numbers. It took me a minute and I messed up at first, but I got one of my zeros is 2. So when I plugged in 2, I found 2 is one of my answers. If you didn't get there, plug 2 in and make sure it works. Then continue on with your steps. A bunch of you have been kind of working on your own, but if anyone looked up at the board, I struggled there for a second because I lost my negative. again, I'm gonna keep reiterating, this isn't hard, but because there's so many steps, there's room for error. So just make sure you're really careful. As someone who just wasn't a second ago, make sure you bring all your negatives through, make sure you copy everything down correctly. And then remember, you should get a 0 here. So I was getting to a point where I was like, there's no way I'm gonna get a 0. I must have messed up because I proved a minute ago that it did work. So just letting you know that I messed up too. It's really easy to do so on these. You also should be able to factor pretty easily and get all of our zeros, including that one. Then once you have that and you know your end behavior, go ahead and graph them. We're combining a ton of skills in these types of problems. You guys hanging in there okay? Okay. I can zoom in, I can talk about any of this. We'll go back to the bounds on the next page if you are all done with this one. So go ahead and flip back, find the upper and the lower bounds. Anybody questions on G before I move on? Okay, let's keep it going then. Okay, these upper and lower bounds might look kind of crazy. All we're doing here is synthetic division. We're going to synthetically divide, and then based on what answer I get, that's going to tell me if I'm upper or lower or confirming or denying, okay? Both of these say show that, which means that we're just kind of proving why this is true. So we'll start with our synthetic division. We'll put 3 in the house, and then we'll put the coefficients in the line next to it. Do your synthetic division out. At this point, it should be pretty second nature to all of us. Now, because it's a bound does not mean that it's going to have a remainder of 0, okay? We don't even need to write this in like a polynomial equation, okay? All I care about here is the pattern of these numbers. All of these numbers are positive. When you do synthetic division and all your answers are positive, that makes it an upper bound. So upper bound, and it's because all numbers are positive. When we do a lower bound, we're going to do a very similar idea, but it's going to be a different reason because it's now lower bound. So go ahead and do synthetic division for number 7 and see if you can decide what's different between what we just did and what this one will be. Now that you've done your synthetic division, do you notice any pattern about these numbers? Every other one. So they alternate. So I'm going to say this is lower bound because the signs are alternating. Has alternating signs. Okay. Right. I know that's the end of 2-4, but I want to do, I think, 3 more problems in 2-5. Skip that whole next page. We'll come back to that. Skip that whole page. And we're going to do the 3 problems on the page after that. Okay. When we're done with these 3 problems, then I'm going to let you work on homework for the rest of class. Let's do We'll do 2A to start. 2A and B are the same type of problem. 3A is like what we were just doing, but I'm going to see if you can try and remember some of that on your own in a moment. These say write the polynomial function multiply out. And this one has zeros of 2 and I, and it contains the point -1, 8. We're going to pause and we're going to ignore this part right here for right now. We're going to come back to it, but for right now, we're going to ignore that. We're going to only focus on the fact that we've got zeros of 2 and I. Okay. How do we write that I have a 0 of 2?
X minus 2.
X minus 2. That logic, how do you think we're going to write we have a 0 of I? X minus I, very good. Now, we never factor things out to get just an I, right? In order to get normal real numbers for everything else, but get an I as an answer, we need to counteract that with its conjugate. We have to use its plus I. So if I write that there's a 0 of an I, you have to assume that we also have a 0 of a negative I. So that's why I have X minus I and X plus I. Okay. Before we deal with that containing, we're going to multiply this all the way out, okay? So we're going to distribute, we're going to factor, we're going to FOIL all that stuff. And let's start with the i's to begin with, okay? So we're going to FOIL that all the way out. In my last class, someone essentially tried to do this in their head to see how we would have gotten I. I like to do it this way so you don't have to do any work in your head. We're just going to multiply it out. Everything else stays the same. But now I get I squared plus xi minus xi minus I squared. What cancels out? Xi cancels out. What is negative x or negative I squared? What's that the same thing as? Plus 1, very good. So then this now is x squared plus 1. That's something we have seen before. That's okay. We have seen that before. That's why we want to get it down to this form, because we don't normally see it with the i's, but this is what it would be otherwise. Let's go ahead and keep multiplying out, multiply it all the way out, so I just have x's left. So we're FOIL that. So I get y equals x to the third minus 2x squared plus x minus 2. If all I said was this, it has these zeros, multiply it out, we would be done. However, we still have to deal with the containing this point, okay? So we are not ignoring that anymore. We're going to jump, but I'm going to put that over here. That is my x and that's my y. So we're going to plug those in for x and y. And do you remember in the quadratics we did this, but we had an a? I will have a coefficient of an a. So we'll have 8 equals x to the third minus 2x squared plus x minus 2. All my y's are 8, all my x's are -1. And then we are going to have an a value out in the very, very front. We have to have some kind of variable or else we have nothing to solve for. So we're going to be able to combine like terms, simplify, solve, and get that a all by itself. So we'll start with our parentheses. We'll do -1 to the third is -1. -1 squared is +1 times -2 is -2. And then -1 minus 2. -1 minus 2 minus another one minus 2 more is -6. And that's -6 times a. So I'm going to write that -6 in front so that I don't try and add or subtract anything off. I'm going to remember that it's being multiplied by a. So how am I going to get rid of that -6? Divide. So I get -4/3 equals a. And then we can actually, let's go back maybe to this step right here and put a in here. So we'll just make that a coefficient of a. So y equals -4/3, and then we'll write x minus 2x squared plus 1.
Not putting it into the last one.
We could plug it into the last one too. You could also plug it in here and just put the a, the -4/3 in there as well. But remember, it goes in front of all of it, so you just need big parentheses. Either one of those is okay. And then no need to simplify out, we were good as that. Let's do the same idea for the one below it. This one's a little bit more confusing because it's not just a 0 of I, it's a 0 of 1 plus 2I. Okay, but let's break it apart. Again, we'll ignore the containing that point for a second. We'll come back to it. Let's write my zeros. So I'm going to write y. What's my first 0 set going to be? X minus 1. Just like we did before, we'll do x minus this number right here. However, it's like a compound number, so we'll put it in parentheses. X minus 1 plus 2I. And then we're also going to do its conjugate, x minus 1 minus 2I. I need a positive and I need a negative. And some of you might look ahead and you'd be like, well, Miss White, we have to distribute that negative to it. You're right, but it will still have one of each. Just kind of weird having a two-parter instead of just a one number. But we can simplify it. So distribute that negative to everything and then we'll distribute. X minus 1 minus 2I and then x minus 1 plus 2I. I like to get rid of my i's first. So we're going to essentially FOIL, but I have to multiply everything by everything. So x gets multiplied by everything in the second parentheses. -1 gets multiplied by everything in the second parentheses. And then -2 gets multiplied by everything in the other parentheses. Everybody okay? Did I lose anyone? Okay. The beginning stays the same. X times x is x squared. X times -1 is -x. X times 2i is 2xi. -1 times x is minus x. -1 times -1 is 1. -1 times 2i is minus 2i. And then -2i times x is -2xi. -2i times -1 is plus 2i. -2i times positive 2i is minus 4i squared.
At least 31 is this long.
Probably not. Probably one like the one above.
Because that one is like,
I like to do harder things to practice, so then we get to a test or quiz, you're like, oh, this is so easy because I've done harders. Okay, now let's combine like terms, okay? I've just been carrying this y, x minus 1 this whole time. Okay, I see an x squared. I don't see any other x squared, so that'll be my only one. What about x's? I see a negative x, I see a negative x. So minus 2x. The positive 2xi cancels with the negative 2xi. So does the negative 2i and the positive 2i. What is negative 4i squared the same thing as? Plus 4. And so my last number is going to be 1 plus 4 is going to be 5. All right, and then let's finish doing it. Let's multiply out that x minus 1 to everything. That one is going to go to all of those, and this one is going to go to all of those, and that will be my last part before I get A involved. Right, that's what I get when I simplify everything out. And that's what I get when I'm ignoring the containing that point. But let's bring that containing that point back in. Plug your 4 in for your y, plug your -1 for your x, and then we'll put an a in the very front right there. So I'll go 4 equals a times -1 to the third minus 3 times -1 squared plus 7 times -1 minus 5. Four equals a times -1 times plus -3 plus -7 minus 5. Ooh, that's a lot of negative numbers. 4, -11, -16. And then we'll divide by 16. This one is pretty ugly back in this like simplified form even. So let's just go to the very last form. So we'll just plug it into this equation right there for that negative, for that a. So y equals -1/4 x to the third minus 3x squared plus 7x minus. Ooh, a lot. Yeah, Maddie.
So final column,
You are replacing a with the number that you found. Yep. Okay. We got one more problem. One last problem today. You guys are killing it. Okay. The last problem says find all the zeros, and it's the exact same steps of what we did like 4 times already today. So I'm going to try and be quiet. What I would like you to remember though is this is an x to the third. So if you need to remember, you need to think of it this way. You may need to write it as x to the third plus 0x squared plus 4x minus 5. Okay. So I'll be silent. I'll put my work on the board. So if you're completely lost, just check in with the board. But if you're like, no, I think I know what I'm doing, try and focus and see, and then check in with me when you get stuck, okay? Solve for all your zeros. Factor quadratic form. If you can't do that, PRR. Plug in. Synthetic division. Then go back to the beginning. Remember, first thing you do is your PRRs, and then you check to see what works. Then we do our synthetic division. and get my new factor. And then I try and factor in quadratic formula again. And this one it did in quadratic formula. The only real difference of 2.5 that we had in 2.4 is we're now getting imaginary numbers. And so I got my quadratic formula and I just got kind of a funky answer with an I, and that's okay. So that is all my work all together. I'm sorry, I'm a little fast. That's all I got. Whew. I know, that was a lot. But we have a couple minutes. I want you to start on your homework, see what maybe you might have a question on. I see you guys on Monday because today's just a day 3. We are looking at a quiz on Thursday. We do not have any school on Wednesday because it's PSAT. So quiz on Thursday, and then your following text will be the 28th, I think. Monday the 28th. I'll stop this recording and I'm here to help with homework, or if you just need a minute, take a minute.